Okay, good morning, everybody, or morning here in Spain. It might be afternoon, evening where you are, or maybe you're watching us on catch up, in which case it could be any time of the day. If you are watching on catch us, remember to give us a little hashtag catch up or a like or something so we know that you're there. And obviously, feel free to say hello and feel free to leave any comments, questions in the chat, whether you're watching live now or on catch up. So we've got a really interesting session this morning. We're joined by Mark Carver from the University of St Andrews in Scotland, and he's going to be talking to us about quality development in teacher education programs. Mark he's a lecturer at the university working on the Masters in TESOL, and also in January, they're starting a new professional practice doctorate in TESOL, and I'm sure he can tell us more about that at some point during the session. So I'm going to hand over to Mark and I'll be keeping an eye on the chat. Thank you very much for joining us, Mark.
Great, thank you for having me. It's really great to be here. And if you are watching live, do please pop those questions in and I'll try to take them as we go. And I have got a little clock here, so hopefully I'll keep to time. So I wanted to talk about how do we actually measure quality when we're thinking about a high quality program. And there's a lot of academic discussion about what counts as quality in teacher education, but not so much in ELT or TESOL. So I wanted to try bring those two areas together and see to what extent we could use some of those concepts to help us. So firstly, I think it's worth saying, why is it worth doing this? And if we look at the literature in initial teacher education, we have a distinction between learning teaching versus learning to teach. So the former there, learning to teach, is seeing teaching as a kind of craft, perhaps, as something very much rooted in practice, and you're taught how to do things. Whereas learning teaching is generally associated with the longer programs and the idea that you are finding your version of yourself as a teacher and you are learning the profession. So it's a very blunt distinction, but often this is used comparing, say, England and Scotland. So in England, you have a wide range of initial teacher education programs. Some of those can be a couple of weeks, a couple of months long, and mostly in schools with very little theory. You might, for example, get your qualified teacher status by meeting the standards and being observed, but you might not get the academic qualification, traditionally the PGCE. In Scotland, you have to get the academic qualification. All our teacher education is based in universities. So either you have your undergraduate year plus 1 year, or you have a 4-year undergraduate program. And if we think about the situation in the ELT, you can perhaps see how like the 1 month CELTA is more on that learning to teach end of the spectrum. Whereas the Delta with kind of the regular reflections on practice would be more at the learning teaching side. So often the distinction is to what extent is reflective practice part of the program. So the reason we need to theorize quality also is because we need to identify features of high quality and distinguish them between what in those actually makes them high quality. So for example, if you're looking for, university rankings come out every year, and I'm pleased to say St Andrews tops the table for the first time this year. It's a bit of a contrivance, of course, but we'll take it. But what does that actually mean? What made us get the good score, the good ranking, versus what actually makes for a good quality program? So you don't just want to imitate the people who, or the institutions or the programs that are coming out as the best, because that can often conflate a lot of things that don't really matter and aren't worth imitating. So the whole idea of theorizing quality is that you can identify ways to enhance existing programs or to design new programs, and that's what I was interested in. And also, I think it's a more productive conversation. So particularly when we look at ELT, when we talk about the quality of programs, it can become an argument between which are the good programs and which are the bad programs, or even good providers, bad providers. So having a theoretical foundation helps to get past some of that and lead to a more productive conversation. And quality is one of those that's very tacit. So it's often difficult for us to articulate why we think a program is high quality. And we generally only have the experience of programs we ourselves have taken or perhaps taught. So making comparisons between programs is often a way to draw out that tacit knowledge. So what is it that makes this program better than this program? And therefore, is that thing something generalizable across all programs? It also means that when we see a lead-in program, and I'll use the CELTA again because globally it is by far and away the most dominant teacher education program in any discipline. But you can see the dominance of something like that as a mark of quality, and therefore you can recreate and institutionalize the biases and the prejudices that may exist in that. So just because something is on top doesn't necessarily mean it's high quality, or even if it is high quality, it doesn't mean it should be imitated or perpetuated. And I think we also need to recognize that ELT is an industry, perhaps more than most other areas of education. So there are competing interests and there are professional bodies with their own agendas as well. So we need to be, again, aware of the ways in which quality can be constructed to align with particular interest groups. However, there is some agreement. So this is, I've put the link at the end because this was a website that has now been deleted, but I managed to grab some of their files and I've uploaded them. And as I've put a stable link in the reference list. So this was guidance on what to look for in a program. And you can see that all these organizations agreed on it. And I think it was wonderful that all these organizations had input. However, when I show you the criteria in a second, you'll possibly agree with me that all they really did was agree on how to avoid a bad course. We weren't really able to reach a conceptualization of quality. We were really just able to give an idea of red flags. So the questions they came up with, and these are a little bit in prompts, who provides it? So the quality of the provider, is it accredited by some kind of government level institution? Is it recognized on a national qualification framework? So for example, in Scotland, we have the SCQF, but every country has its own. What's the status of the awarding body? Is it governmental? Is it associated with a university, for example? And then do they monitor these programs, or is it almost a franchise? And once you've got your approval, off you go. So for example, something like the British Council has that ongoing inspection process. And as we get further down the list, we see, for example, admissions and applications procedures. So does everybody who applies get on? If your check clears, you're on. And likely, also, how likely, is it possible that you can fail? Or is it, if your check clears, you've passed? So there's a tension there because there should be the possibility of failing. You shouldn't just get your qualification by showing up. But equally, you don't want to accept everybody onto the program when there isn't a reasonable chance of success. That we'd see that as unethical. We also have 100 hours content. And again, this is something that's very particular to ELT, that we have, sometimes we see 100, sometimes we see 120, that there has to be contact, or you might also see observed teaching hours. So we have these specified numbers of hours, which is quite unusual actually when we look at other areas. Do you get observed? Do you get supervised? Do you get assessed teaching real students versus, for example, micro teaching? And if you're not happy with the program or your result, can you appeal? Can you complain? So what this group of people coming together as quite were able to agree on was that all this should be in place. And if you can't get a straight answer to some of these questions, or you don't, it's not an encouraging answer, then probably that's not a higher quality program. So that's a great place to start, but that organization has kind of started and ended there, and there were lots of nice conversations and a conference or two, but unfortunately it doesn't seem to have really had much impact beyond that, which is a real shame because it is very good work. So when I'm looking for some ideas, I'm going to teacher preparation, initial teacher education, just to see what are the distinctions we make in terms of defining quality. So we can talk about teaching standards. So can you put together a file of evidence showing, an effective lesson plan, an effective assessment, effective differentiation, versus an academic qualification? So typically the standards would be observed in practice. You would have formal lesson observations, and you would be ticking certain criteria that you've got evidence that you've met. And the qualification would be more assignment based. So essays, annotated bibliographies, rationales to go with a lesson plan, for example. So we see in the teaching as craft the assumption that the standards are the thing, and that meeting the standard is the mark of quality. And particularly if you have national standards for what a teacher should be able to do at whatever level, then the institutions and the programs that can deliver graduates able to meet those standards are assumed to be higher quality. So you can be interested variously in the outputs. So you can look at, do the teachers stay in the profession? Do they feel able to do the things they need to do? Do they feel that they're going to stay in the career? And you can also look at the input. So is the theory on the program relevant, current? You could also look at performance accountability. So you could look at you could do, for example, observations of lectures on the program, and you could see how effectively does it work from that perspective. And we also see at the sector level the distinction between what's the purpose of teacher education. Is it to develop the self as a teacher, or is it provision of labour? It's producing enough teachers to meet the demand of the labour market. And any programme will be a combination of the two. But thinking about ELT programmes in the UK, there's an interesting tension there, because often that labour will be overseas. So the labour market as such is much more global in our sector than it is in teacher education. So we need to think about that in a slightly different way too. So this is the densest bit of theory that I've got for you. So we'll get through it together, and then as I bring it across to ELT, I've got some more concrete examples. So my colleague Paul Adams and Karen McLennan elaborated on this model of identifying, doing, and knowing teaching. So they're thinking here about what does it mean at the level of an individual teacher? What do they want to get out of a high quality program? What are the outcomes that matter? And it's just that the first level is passing as a teacher, which means that you kind of get to know the profession, and you're able to act the part. So you're able to in some cases even look the part. You follow the routines, the procedures, you know how schools work, and you're able to fall in line. And then once you've got that down, the next level is learning the pedagogy of your particular subject or your age range. So particularly in ELT, our pedagogy is quite distinct from the general pedagogy you see in general education programs. So you also learn what is not done in your particular subject or age range. And that's where you can begin to look at the outcomes. So can this teacher not just look and act like a teacher, but can they get exam results? Can they control a class? These are the two main things that you're interested in if you're looking at the ability to do teaching. But then at the top level, and what really distinguishes teacher education from teacher training, is what Adams and McLennan refer to as knowing teaching. So this has been able to look at the way things work in your local context, in your school, but you're able to link that with the wider theoretical context. So you're able to see how you can not take theory that you learned on your program and put it into practice, or not see practice and reflect on it using theory, but to actually work as a critically reflective teacher, to perhaps make changes in the moment. So we talk about teacher reflexivity. So I did some research during COVID-19, which was looking at how did teachers manage this sudden shift to a new way of teaching. And that this concept of teacher reflexivity was really important because, you know, there were new things that nobody really knew how to do. So you had to learn to do it and do it, think about what you should be doing or shouldn't be doing. And the teachers who had this well-developed sense of reflexivity were much more able to cope or even thrive in that situation. So if we think about the three levels of how a teacher develops here, identifying as a teacher, doing teaching, and knowing what it is to teach, to be a teacher, then hopefully you can see how we can think about quality in different ways. So the program that helps you learn how to do those three levels would look quite different. So when we get to actually measuring quality or proving quality, leaving aside the problematic term measure, generally we look for student attainment data. So for example, the best student teachers will go on to get the best exam results from their pupils. So you kind of make this double inference. So you say, well, yeah, they got an 80% pass rate in this school where we expected them to get 70, so they've done better than expectations, so they must be a good teacher, therefore their teacher education program must have been good. And you kind of work backwards from that. The other way is to say, well, we know what a good quality program looks like, so we can just look at, is the program well organized? We can look at some sample lectures, we can look at some assignments and see what kind of work comes up. We can perhaps look at the qualifications of the people leading the programs. We can look at, do these teachers stay in work, or do they, for example, have lots of time off with stress or ill health? So you can see we've got slightly different ways of looking at quality when it comes to actually measuring it. But these would be very difficult in ELT, and they also don't really engage with these different conceptualizations of quality. They're not rich enough measures. When we look at higher education specifically, so longer programs and generally have more longer term aims, we think about student satisfaction. So in the UK context, students pay tuition fees. Not everybody in Scotland does, but student satisfaction through National Student Survey or the Postgraduate Taught Experience Survey or Postgraduate Research Experience Survey is a measure of program quality, because the students are perhaps the only ones who experience all parts of a program, so we want to know their views. We generally look for graduate employment, so what percentage of your graduates get graduate level jobs versus just any job or no job, or indeed going to post-study. We might also look at entry standards. So what do you require for entry? Is it so to get onto, so we're thinking like A levels or higher or international baccalaureate scores, or we might have an IELTS score for a language requirement. And again, the higher the standard implies the higher quality program. It's more competitive. We also look at things like cash money. So what is the spend per student? How much of that tuition fee do you actually see coming back to you in terms of resources, staffing? And you can look at staff-student ratios. How many students continue to the end of the program? How many of them stay in their profession after graduation? And then we can also look at value added or access. So based on the entry profile, do students do better or worse than expected? And are you able to attract students from diverse backgrounds? And usually in the UK, we tend to mean that in terms of economic diversity, so that you come from a particular area that has we have a deprivation index. So if you live in area 1, that means you're in the area that has the least economic resources and the lowest proportion of young people going to university. So universities are incentivized to attract students from those areas. So these are kind of common measures of H equality, much more broadly speaking. And I think you can see how some of these you can turn on or off. You can turn that up. So if you want to increase your staffing score, you hire more staff. And assuming you've got the money there, you can spend more per student to get that figure up. You can increase your entry standards up to the point where you are no longer able to attract enough students. But other things you can't really game. So the satisfaction scores, graduate employment, these are things that are much trickier for you to manipulate on a year-by-year basis. So if we can try to marry those together, so I mentioned the university rankings. So here's how this is put together. So some of these measures that are used in this ranking that says St Andrews, Cambridge, Oxford, UCL are the best universities in the country. They actually have weightings to these things. So you can see, for example, the student staff ratio, 15% allocated to that. And actually that's possibly part of why St Andrews does quite so well, because we do have very small classes. I don't think for any particular reason other than we're a small university and our rooms are quite small. But you can see how these can really affect us. But if you look at how this varies in some disciplines, so I've put on the right there, medicine, dentistry, and veterinary science, they have a different calculation. So there's no mention in the quality of those programs for continuation or for career prospects. So I guess if you're in medicine, dentistry, or veterinary science, it's assumed you're going to get a graduate level job because you'll be doctor, dentist, vet. But we don't do that in teaching. We still look at how the percentage who go on to be teachers. So it's interesting that they don't do that in medicine. And then we have these really high scores, high weightings for the entry score, for the staff-student ratio. So you have small classes, very competitive entry to the programs. And again, we don't see that in teacher education. So I think it's quite interesting the way that different disciplines are weighted, but we, in terms of measuring teacher education programs and ranking the quality, we don't do it in that way. So here's a framework that we've been using to look, so that as part of a Scottish Government project, I'm part of a team that has been tasked with measuring quality and coming up with a framework that we can use nationwide. So we adapted something from the literature, and again, all the links are at the end. There's a big literature review that informed this, and it's strongly recommended reading because it takes a global focus. So the 8 components, so there were 6 components in the literature we added to. One of those we added was partnership. So what we can say is that a high quality program can demonstrate quality in each of these areas. So for example, in partnership, do you have good relationships with your local schools, with your local authorities? Is there collaboration? Is there shared professional learning? Do you get together to learn together, or do schools have input on program design in the university? Or is it very much the university does this thing and the school does this thing and you don't really talk to each other? That would be less good. And then component 2, just to give one more example, admissions, recruitment and retention. So again, you can look at selection. Do you select the students with the best exam scores, or do you perhaps have interviews or sample lessons that you get to teach? Conversion rate means how many of those students actually come. what qualifications do they have? Do they stay in the program? And are they diverse? And particularly when we say diverse, we're specifically meaning the parts of the cities they come from. So it really does get down to what your postcode is. So we have these measures of quality, and so perhaps component 4 is the closest to the 100 hours specified. We have a certain number of days that you have to be in school and a certain number of hours that you need to have been observed teaching. But then we also have much more flexible measures. So we would ask students, are you happy with your learning in school? We'd ask the schools, are they happy? We'd ask the university staff, do you think this is effective learning? And we, for example, in component 3, we might have a standard agreement of what things need to be in a program. And we might ask students at the end, do you feel confident? Do you feel confident, competent, able? We have different ways of doing this. To teach literacy, to teach numeracy, to give pastoral support, whatever things you're interested in. And there's a big list. So you can see from these examples, we've elaborated what quality is to how quality manifests in all areas of how a program works, not just how it's designed, but how it operates. And here are some more. So for example, the people teaching on the programs, we can have measures of their quality. So do they get ongoing career development? Do they continue to improve their skills and abilities? Do their students rate them? What percentage of them are on permanent contracts? How many of them have doctorates? How many of them are qualified teachers? It's generally assumed that everybody teaching on a teacher education program is a qualified teacher. That's not necessarily the case. So you can see how we elaborate these concepts of quality into the different components. And again, if we go back to that list from all the TESOL organizations, you can see, for example, component 8 down there, sort of the reputation of the organization was a huge part of that. And it's kind of assumed that a reputable organization runs and maintains high quality, reputable programs. So when I was thinking of adapting this to a TESOL context, I was specifically thinking of the TESOL context in Scotland. So we have the issue of selectivity, and generally because we get our funding from the Scottish government, we're not competing for student numbers because our student numbers are capped. So it's not like we're competing for all these tuition fees in the same way that a language school, a private provider, or a university in another part of the UK would have to do. And indeed, we're not even competing all that much on student quality because the places are capped so much that if you're looking for the students with the highest grades, well, so many go to Edinburgh, so many go to Glasgow, so many go to St Andrews, so many go to Aberdeen, and then they have their second choices, their third choices, and we do compete on student diversity though. So we actively recruit, advertise, offer bursaries to students in particular areas. However, this is only for students who live in Scotland, and it's generally only at undergraduate level. And I think this is a real limitation because we're not including linguistic diversity, we're not thinking about diversity of international students or even postgraduate students. So if you come from a deprived area of Indonesia, you're treated the same as if you come from the wealthiest area of Hong Kong. That there's no distinction made in terms of value in diversity in that respect, unless of course it's part of the vision of the program and you want to make it so. But generally, that's not part of how our programs are measured. There's no external reward for thinking about that kind of diversity. So it's quite a narrow definition of diversity, particularly in TESOL. So if I want to know how many teachers get jobs in schools, I can pull that data in a couple of minutes. It's just there. I know exactly what salary that they're on because all the teachers start on the same salary. So that's a really easy way to measure a teacher education program doesn't really work for a TESOL program, because what counts as a graduate level job in different countries? What about salary? Are we saying that a graduate level job is above £30,000 a year? Well, you're not going to make that in a lot of countries. So it becomes difficult to define. Continuation retention, as I mentioned, when we think about that example from medicine, we know it's an issue in the profession that a lot of people do this job for a couple of years and then move on. But we don't really have a measure of that. And it's unclear whether that's to do with the quality of their program or just the attractiveness of the profession more generally. So, for example, in teacher education, we have this concept of the wastage rate, which means you are no longer teaching in a state-funded school. But to apply that measure to a TESOL program simply wouldn't work. So generally, you funded your own studies. If you're taking a CELTA, Delta, MSc TESOL, PhD or DProf TESOL, you've generally paid for yourself, or maybe your government's paid. So the idea that you need to be teaching in a school in the country you studied in just doesn't work in the same way. It's also very difficult to track our graduates. They tend to go all over the world, and maybe they'll add you on Facebook, and that's the way you can get in touch with them a couple of years later and say, can you do the survey for me? But generally, it's very difficult to track these graduates versus ones who stay in country. It also becomes difficult to compare lecturer qualifications and experience in TESOL. So if you're a teacher educator in the state system, you've probably done your 10, 20 years in state schools, you've got a master's or a doctorate, and now you're a teacher educator. But in TESOL, we've got a range of qualifications that could be relevant. In our department at St Andrews, for example, some of us are high school teachers, some have doctorates, but nobody has a doctorate in TESOL because they're just not compros. Most of us are either applied linguistics or educational research. And what kind of experience counts? Are we looking for people who have perhaps had experience running their own schools, taught in a range of different countries and contexts, taught at university level? How do you compare the experience? Because it's not just years of service in the same way that we think about teacher education on a national level. So really the key question is, as well as how do we conceptualize quality, what do we compare ELT, TESOL, teacher preparation to? And particularly when we look at the prestigious universities in the UK, that often these are in schools or units that are not particularly research active. So they have these huge global reputations, but the department itself might have a relatively low status within its university, and sometimes referred to as coming through the tradesman's entrance. So we need to be aware of all these. And then, as Steve Brown from University of West Scotland has argued at a recent ITEFL, as much as a discipline we're trying to professionalize ourselves, and we're looking at increasingly taking high-level study, indeed seeing this as something that could be a profession for life, and that you can have career progression without necessarily having to start your own business, for example. While we're trying to do that as a discipline, ELT, more than state-funded education, is still an industry. And the pressure there is to deprofessionalize, to de-skill, to have these quick, short teacher training programs that provide a churn of new teachers willing to work for very low salaries. So we've got this strong tension between our discipline and our industry. So how do we deal with that when we come up with measures of quality? Here's an example of how this can be done, I think, very well, but also it's a little bit messy. So this is not particularly well known, but it's what's called a PDA, Professional Development Award. And it's put together usually in further education in Scotland. And there are different pathways. So depending on, so you could do all of this with just these modules that only exist in colleges in Scotland, or you can supplant it with, for example, a CELTA or a Trinity or parts of a Delta. And you can put together different credits at different levels, and you can achieve different levels of recognition through this professional development award. So it's really well suited to people in practice. You get experience in a range of settings, and it has a coherence, but it also has a flexibility, and you can just go a unit at a time. You're also able to get some level of government recognition, but we do have this real problem in Scotland that being recognised as an ELT teacher is not possible in our system as it stands. And I'm obviously trying to change this, but at the moment you can only have ELT as a second subject. So it's actually impossible to be qualified and recognised as a professional ELT teacher in Scotland, which is, to my mind, crazy. And even though this programme here, I think people looking at it and thinking, it includes, for example, Delta points, but the level it's all awarded to only comes out at a equivalent to undergraduate level. And so again, where's that progression to that high level of recognition of award? So lots of interesting things to look at in this diagram, and different pathways you can take. And also this is possibly the only way you'll get any kind of state funding for becoming an ELT teacher, certainly in my country. So it's an interesting example of how these concepts of quality fit. So for example, what makes this high quality is that it integrates with the private provider programs. It has the potential to learn whilst in practice for blended delivery for one unit at a time, incremental delivery. It has specific programs related to the local context. So you can see assessment and the Scottish framework, very much serving that local demand. It has optional modules as well. So you can see how this is trying to get around that problem of, once you've got a CELTA, what next? Is it just the Delta and then becoming a trainer? What other ways are there to progress your career? And this is one example that I think works really well. I've never met anybody who's ever heard of it. I found this when I was doing some research into the history of ELT in Scotland, and I kind of stumbled across it. So needs to be better known, perhaps. So here's where I've landed. I've taken the 8 components that I showed you before, and I've tried to articulate these specifically for ELT contexts. So for partnership, does it engage with local international communities of practice? So does it engage with the ESOL community in country, but also the ELT communities and pedagogies globally? And can students relate the experiences they see in their own local professional context to the theory of the programme? Is the theory relevant? How do you enter the programme? So are we selecting, for example, an IELTS 6.5 and an undergrad in any subject? Or are we saying you need to have some teaching experience, you need to have perhaps volunteered in a school? So we have the standard measures. Is it competitive? Do students continue? But one that I've been keen to add is this concept of internationalization at home. So even if you are unable to offer internationalized experiences like study abroad, you can look for diversity in the student body, in the staff body. So for example, skipping ahead to component 5, do the teachers on the program, do the lecturers, do they speak different languages? Do they have experiences of being highly proficient or bilingual? Do they, are any of them using English as an additional language, and they have that experience to draw? And have they taught in a range of contexts and countries? So can you internationalize the program in that way, but also in terms of the curriculum? So for example, I try to use a lot of examples of assessments from Asia when I'm teaching my assessment modules. For the program design, can you demonstrate that you are meeting the qualities of these satisfaction surveys? Are you delivering a good product? So things like, is the feedback timely? Is it well organized? Are you able to contact a tutor if you need to? But also these broader measures. Do students feel ready to do the job when they leave? And key things I've added here, I don't like the distinction between practice-based assessment and academic assessment. I think you can combine these much more effectively than we do. So authentic assessment is really key to design for me. The practicum is an issue because, for example, on all of our programs, the master's program, the doctoral program, we have no requirement for observed teaching practice. So if we go back to that quite framework, we wouldn't be qualifying as a high quality provider because we don't have any teaching practice. And that's during our students are already practicing teachers. So do we have a rationale for that approach? Is it just convenience, or can we find ways to bring those experiences into their learning? And can we see any impact on how you move up that ladder of actually learning teaching rather than just picking up tips and tricks? I've added in component 6 what I call the do-over score. So this came from the OECD's survey, Teaching and Learning International study survey, TALIS. They have a question, if you offered your time again, would you still choose to be a teacher? Would you still choose this same program? And I think that's a fantastic question. So even if you're not doing the kind of job that we think you should be doing and we count as progression, if you feel that you got value from your program 2, 3, 5 years out, I think that's an excellent question, and I think that's a really important measure. So are you working in the kinds of jobs you want to be working in? Are you still engaged in professional learning, that it's not just one and done and you feel that you've got a teacher toolkit and off you go? Are you still improving your practice? And then we can also come in, that leads into component 7. Do employers rate us? Do we have repeat business from certain schools sending their teachers to us? Do graduates give good feedback? And then finally, component 8, sort of linking to this satisfaction, is the program well run? There are ways to measure that. And what's the reputation of the institution, but also the department, and also the program, and also the lecturers? And can you, is it transparent, for example, who's teaching our program and what their credentials are, or what place professional learning has in this particular department? Is there a good research culture, for example? And there are measures of these in all kinds of surveys. So that's how I've tried to articulate these components within a TESOL higher education context in my country. But hopefully it's also an example of how this might adapt and be a useful framework for turning some of that theory I did half an hour ago into practice in your own context. And I very much welcome anybody who's doing that. So nearly done. How do we turn this into something student facing? I think we need to look at assessment as a portfolio. So we need to break the practice-based assessment, the observation of practice, and the idea and the essays that you do. And we need to bring that into a richer, we don't want a distinction between standards and qualifications. I want that to be integrated. I want it to be context relevant. So I think portfolio assessment is very much the way to go for that. Do you get sufficient resources? So do you have a decent library? But also, are your lecturers within a community of practice? Can you engage with the profession through the work you're doing? Is it internationalized? Is it well run? And from all the universities I've worked at, my first reaction is usually, I can't believe this place runs like this. I've never seen so many talented people work so ineffectively. Maybe that's a common experience in any workplace. But again, it's something particularly if you get the chance to go visit somewhere, I think you can quickly pick up on a vibe on, are you going to get a good product experience? As much as we don't like about talking to students as consumers, I think it's something useful to tell students, look out for. Is it well run? Do you get a timely response to your emails? Are there loads of bits of paper saying that rooms have been cancelled or changed or moved? Does the Wi-Fi keep dropping out? Just these little indicators that things might not be quite as smooth as they should be. Perhaps look for the chance for a transformational experience. If you're talking to lecturers on a program that you're thinking about taking, ask them, how will this program help me grow as an individual? Or how will this help me to make effective change in my school? How will I improve my practice? How will I have an impact on others? I think that's a really challenging question, but it's a good one to put to people when you're thinking about taking a program. So I think these are all, so questions that students could ask when they're looking for a program. And I think these are hopefully better questions than, are there 100 contact hours? Because hopefully all that's already taken care of. You're already avoiding a bad provider. This is about choosing a high quality program. So here's what's happening next. I'm considering how might that framework, work at the different levels. Does the framework work equally well for master's and doctoral level? How do we get continuity between those? And then how do we integrate other concepts such as what it means to be a master teacher or a doctoral practitioner? How do you integrate that with the qualities of the program and these frameworks? And then how do we get some continuity between these? So how do you go from perhaps an undergraduate in a different discipline to a CELTA, to a taster, to a bit of a Delta, to a bit of a master's, to a postgraduate certificate, to maybe a teaching qualification in your own country? So how do you wrap these around these formal qualifications, but also professional learning? So learning in practice through mentorship or from short courses that perhaps your school sent you on. So how do we wrap all that around so that you're not just repeating things, or you're not just credentializing and giving people the bit of paper? And then how do we translate these components, these 8 things, into things that students can ask about? So questions like this, but also the way that I can show that I've thought about this and I've designed a high quality program, hopefully. So I've put a proposal in, hopefully they'll accept, to present at TESOL in Belfast next May. So I'll be presenting some of these ideas and how I've developed from there. And I've put the link at the bottom there for this doctoral program that I mentioned that I've been designing for the last year around these principles. So hopefully it's an example of trying to put this into effect whilst also working within the constraints of a university system. Perhaps that's something we'll come back to another day. Just to flag up references, the things that have most influenced my thinking, even though he doesn't get a name check in the presentation: David Bowd's work on sustainable assessment, linking the way you assess students to lifelong learning, has been really influential on me. Steve Brown there, his TEFL article, really challenging in thinking about our role as teachers in supporting what is in many ways an exploitative profession, industry. So I strongly recommend looking at that. The framework itself comes from Fuer et al. 2013. But if you look at my paper from 2021 with Aileen Kennedy and Paul Adams, we've elaborated that into the Scottish context. So there's much more detail there. So let's stop and let's see if any questions have come in.
Fantastic. That was really interesting. There haven't been any questions in the chat. I had a couple of kind of thoughts. So talking about career progression, people who are taking a master's in TESOL or going on to do the MProf, what's the future for them? Because I think a lot of people are put off going into higher education in ELT because they don't see what it can do for them?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any good data on that. It's just going to be anecdotal. The students we tend to have already have jobs, so perhaps their schools even sponsor them to come, or they've given them a year sabbatical. So they tend to go back to their same employer, and they're then going for progression, promotion within that. Some are looking to start their own schools, but we have an interesting tension, particularly in the master's level, because you get some people come in who have no teaching experience and no relevant undergraduate degree. And then you get other people who perhaps are qualified high school teachers and have 20 years service and have CELTA Delta, and they're really looking at taking it to the next level. So you end up with a very much a split cohort, which can lead to good discussions, but it then becomes tricky to keep everybody satisfied and give them what they need. So I don't have good data on that. Yeah, if you're just looking at who gets a job, well, kind of everyone gets a job. It just depends how far you're willing to travel and what conditions you're willing to put up with. But equally, as many go into just completely unconnected disciplines and jobs as well. So, you become a tour guide, air hostess. Good luck to you. And so again, it's that's why I like the question of asking them 5 years later, if you could go back and change your mind, would you still do that program, or would you have chosen a different one? And that's why I think that's a better question than, are you a teacher, have you got a promotion or whatever, because it's related to the individual. But again, there's just no data on that. So I don't know, do you know people who've taken masters and what they've kind of gone on to do?
No, I mean, I was thinking more, sometimes we talk to people about doing the DIP TESOL, so Trinity's TESOL qualification, and they kind of say, but I'm happy as a teacher. It might inform my practice, make my classroom practice better, but there are other ways to do that than spending €2,500 on a course. So I think a lot of people are put off if they're happy being just a teacher by going into something that they see as more academic and less practice-based.
I think that's something where we really can learn from teacher education, because that idea of the only way to progress is to become head of department, head teacher, whatever. So now in teacher education programs, we're including units on leadership, not because you're going to be a leader when you're first qualified and 23 years old, although maybe, but probably not. But just to get you thinking about that and thinking about it as a profession, as something that you can progress through and that you can advance just by being a good or better teacher without having to go into management. I'm not sure the extent to which that is true of our profession, because I work at a university, so there are career paths there. A lot of those are based on your research more than your teaching. But as an ELT teacher, unless you go into business for yourself, I'm not really sure what the ladder is just by being a better teacher. It's kind of good for you, good for your students, but I don't see that you get all that much return on it either.
Yeah, no, I mean, somebody's just commented here, Claire, she says further qualifications certainly open more doors, and especially if you want to diversify and get into EAP, for example, or if you're even teaching business English, it might help to have a more focused qualification.
Yeah, I got into EAP kind of by chance. I was just looking at the job ads and saw that they were paying twice as much as the summer schools for the pre-sessionals, and what's this then? And sort of just stumbled into that. If you want to work in the big international schools, then they tend to look for master's programs. Some countries won't accept, for example, a distance learning program. which I think is an oversight. But I was speaking with a colleague who runs a PhD in ELT in Thailand, and they get a lot of students coming down from China. And it has to be face-to-face delivery for the Chinese government to recognize it and for you to get that career progression in their universities. But when you do, it comes quite quickly. But for them, it's a difference between making 30,000 baht in a language school, which is about 600 euros, I guess, and 120,000 baht in an international school, 4 times the salary. And I think, particularly somewhere like Thailand, it has that reputation of like the backpacker teacher. Not even the 1 month, even the CELTA puts you a few levels above the norm. So I think particularly in those kind of contexts, you need these qualifications just to break out of the pack. And again, that's perhaps what Steve Brown was talking about when he's saying that there's this downward pressure, because if all you want is a white face in the front of the classroom, you can go get that quite cheaply and quickly. But if you want a professional teacher who's going to do a good job and maybe improve the practice in the department in the school, they're difficult to find, recruit, retain.
I was thinking about that as well, like when you were talking at the beginning about what is a bad course. Can you imagine a future where there will be prohibitions against these bad courses, against these, like you were saying, pay your 100 euros and you get your certificate? And
it's tricky because you do see, if you just need a certificate, you can go get one, and it's whatever a government immigration officer will think, look, yes, if it's got a watermark and a gold foil label on it, it's probably going to work. And in fact, our degrees don't look all that fancy. It's got a bit of Latin on it, maybe. So yeah, it can get quite problematic. But also some of those courses are actually okay. I again had a colleague who did an analysis of the courses on Groupon and was kind of just expected just to slate it and say, what a load of nonsense. And probably nobody actually takes the course and they just print out their certificate and they're done. But actually, when we looked at it, it's a really well put together program. So and if you just treated it as professional learning, I've taken a MOOC or I've read a textbook, it's actually a really good program. It's just because it's sold as print out your certificate and go travel the world.
Yep. Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? And one other question, thinking about what have been the challenges of internationalizing the course? Because obviously you're talking about doing courses for students who might be teaching anywhere, and you mentioned about bringing assessment from Asia and looking at different studies. How easy has it been to develop that side of the course?
I think you need good access to literature, so you need to be taking your examples globally and not just looking to the US and the UK, and having staff from those different areas helps. Our students come from a range of different countries. St Andrews has particularly strong links with the US, for example, but we attract students from all over the world, and that helps, particularly if you can give them the chance to bring examples to you, and if you can keep in contact with former students who can send you nice examples. So I keep a nice folder of example assessments that students send me, because every year my assessment is critiques these assessments, so I need to keep that fresh. And again, because now I know I have students who know that I like those things, I get sent them. I don't have to actively go find them. But I think you need to look for those opportunities. But you don't necessarily need students and lecturers from all over the world to do that. You can internationalize your curriculum. So that there are ways. The concept I mentioned, internationalization at home, is a really good way to look, because I think we have to recognize, particularly in the UK, so in Scotland we don't have control over our own immigration policies. That's set in London, so Brexit will affect us, and that will limit our internationalization. It limits the lecturers we can recruit. So you need to find other ways. Distance learning, I think, will really open that up. So we probably need to well, we need to challenge this perception that a distance learning program is of lower quality or is easier to blag your way through. Because while it might once have been true, maybe it's not. And something like the Open University, it has such a global reputation for such high quality, and anyone who's taken a module there will speak to the support and the quality you get there usually being better than their experiences on a campus. So I think we really need to push that these distance programs are very, very high quality.
Well, we have had one question come in, but it was linked to your comment about the Moodles, the Groupon courses. Somebody asking if you had a copy of the study or a link to it.
Yeah, I've forgotten his surname. It's called Josh. I'll find him.
That'd be great. Yeah, because I mean, it would be quite interesting to see what the experience was. Cool. Well, huge thanks, Mark, for joining us today. I've put a comment in the chat for anyone if you've got any comments, questions when you're watching on catch up. It might be worth tagging one of us just so that we actually see the comment and can get you a reply. But yeah, really interesting and that's what I was going to say. You've got lots of interesting things coming up as well, Mark, haven't you? So apart from the DProf TESOL starting in January, you've got you're holding a webinar in November on carrying out interviews and focus groups.
Yep. Yeah, so have a look at my Twitter, everything's there. So we've got research seminars that we're doing them online, so they're open to everybody. So if you're interested in learning about particularly research methodology, there's a lot of those coming up with me and my colleagues as well.
And then in March, you're on the Bail expert panel.
British Association of Applied Linguistics. So there's a panel there about the academic job market. So my colleague Xingmon Chong has put that together with Luke Plonsky. So some really good people on that panel, and hopefully we'll have a very good discussion too.
Fabulous. I'll share links to those in the chat or on the summary as well.
Super.
Well, thank you very much again, and hope everyone has a fabulous day, afternoon, evening, whatever time of day it is. See you all soon.
Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.